Buongiorno. Oggi cominciamo I verbi riflessivi, so reflexive verbs. And you need to know how to form the passato prossimo and how to form the imperfetto, tra passato prossimo, and all of that to do this lesson today, okay? So let's talk about what a reflexive verb means. It means that the action of the verb comes back to the subject. So we don't have this concept in English. That's why it's a little tricky just sort of to understand. But you've been using probably reflexive verbs since you started to study Italian. When you say mi chiamo is not my name is, that's il mio nome è. Mi chiamo means I call myself. And so that mi in front of the chiamo is the myself. So let's go through all of those pronouns first, and then we'll go through the whole verb conjugation. So it's half of the formula that you're going to need is including that reflexive pronoun in front of the verb conjugation. So it's pretty easy in terms of you have all of the material that you need to know to conjugate all of these reflexive verbs. You just need to remember to put that pronoun in front. And luckily, there's not a lot of irregular verbs in the present tense that are reflexive, okay? So we're going to talk about reflexive verbs in the present tense, and then we're going to talk about them in the other tenses that we've learned up until this point as well, okay? So if we're talking about the present tense, when you see a reflexive verb written in the infinitive, it's going to end in si. So that si is going to be attached to the end, so arsi or ersi or irsi, and that means that it's reflexive. Because some verbs can be both reflexive and non-reflexive. Per esempio, for example, if we take the verb preparare, to prepare, so I can say preparo la cena, I'm preparing dinner. But if I make the verb reflexive and I put the pronoun in front of that conjugation, mi preparo, that means I'm getting myself ready. So it's the same thing with the verb chiamare, which we already talked about. If I say mi chiamo, it means I call myself because the pronoun is in front. But if I just say chiamo, it means that I'm calling somebody either on the phone or with my voice. Just because there's that si attached to the end of the infinitive, don't let it confuse you at all, because the verb in the present tense is going to be conjugated the exact same way as it would be if it was non-reflexive. So if we take the verb, per esempio, alzarsi, okay? Alzarsi ends in an A-R-S-I in the infinitive, but it just means that it's a regular ARE verb. So then the conjugations are, for the io form, alzo, the tu, alzi, the lui, lei, alza, the noi, alziamo, the voi, alzate, and the loro, alzano. So it just follows the rules like you've been doing this whole time. The thing that you have to remember, though, is to put that reflexive pronoun in front of the verb conjugation. So for the io conjugation, the pronoun that means myself is mi. Mi alzo then means I get myself up. Because you can say alzo, I can say alzo la mano, that's I'm raising my hand, but if I get my whole body up, it's mi alzo. The pronoun for the tu form, if you want to say you're getting yourself up, is ti. Ti alzi. The pronoun for the lui, lei conjugation is si. So si alza is he's getting himself up, she's getting herself up, or you formal are getting yourself up. For the noi form, the pronoun is ci. So ci alziamo is we're getting up, we're getting ourselves up. For the voi form, the pronoun is vi. Vi alzate, you all are getting yourselves up. And for the loro form, it's again si. It's the same as the lui, lei. So si alzano, they're getting themselves up. So those are the reflexive pronouns. Mi, ti, si, ci, vi, si. Va bene? Like I said, the verbs are mostly regular. Most of the reflexive verbs are regular, but let's look at one that's irregular. The verb sedersi, okay? The verb sedersi means to sit down. Io mi siedo, tu ti siedi, lei si siede, noi ci sediamo, voi vi sedete, loro si siedono. Va bene? So that is the only irregular that you're going to have to remember. If it's a verb that ends in ersi, per esempio, not sedersi, we just said that one was irregular, but radersi, to shave oneself, it's just conjugated like a regular ere verb. And if it's a verb that ends in irsi, like divertirsi, to enjoy oneself, it's just conjugated like a regular ire verb, the first set ire verb. It's not the one where you add the isk in the conjugation. Va bene. Okay, so now that you know how to do the conjugations, it's pretty simple, right? So you just remember the pronoun and then you remember the conjugation of the verb. So verbs that are reciprocal, that means the action is coming back within a group of people. So these are going to be in referring to the noi conjugation, the voi conjugation, and the loro conjugation, because you're going to be saying, we all do this thing with each other or to each other, you all do this thing to each other, and they do it to each other. It can't be reciprocal if it's in the io, tu, or lui, lei conjugation, because those are all singular. So let me give you some examples so you see what I mean. So the verb vedersi, per esempio, it's not reflexive, it's reciprocal. So if I said ci vediamo is we see each other. And it's a very common way for Italians to say goodbye. So when they're saying goodbye, they'll say ci vediamo. Okay, so that means we'll see each other later or again. Okay, if I say vi vedete, that's also reciprocal. You all see each other. Okay, or si vedono, they see each other. So you wouldn't say mi vedo, I see myself. So just concentrate on the noi, voi, and loro forms if it's going to be a reciprocal thing. So not all verbs can do this. Another example is the verb incontrarsi, okay? Incontrarsi means to meet up, okay? So if I said ci incontriamo is we meet up or we will meet up. Vi incontrate, you all meet up. And si incontrano, they meet up. You can use conoscersi reciprocally in the present to mean that you've known somebody, okay? So I can say ci conosciamo da molti anni. Ci conosciamo da molti anni. We've known each other for many years. So remember that da, when you translate it, it means since. So if you're saying that something is still continuous, it's still happening, use the present tense and then use da, okay? So you could say vi conoscete da 2 anni. Vi conoscete da 2 anni is you all have known each other since 2 years or for 2 years, because you still know each other. That's why you use the present tense there and da. Or you can say si conoscono da una settimana. Si conoscono da una settimana. They've known each other for a week or since a week, okay? So conoscere or conoscersi, though, when you use it in the passato prossimo, it changes meaning to meet each other for the first time. So if you're using incontrarsi or incontrare, that's to meet up. If you're using conoscere, conoscersi in the passato prossimo, that means to meet for the first time. So there's different ways to express meeting. Va bene? So let's talk about now using reflexive verbs in the imperfect, okay? So you do the same thing that you do in the present tense. You include the reflexive pronoun in front of the verb conjugation, and then you just put the verb into the imperfect form. And as you know now, the imperfect is pretty easy to form. You just need to put that formulaic ending vo, vi, va, vamo, vate, vanno on the end of the verb, right? And then you know that there's not a lot of irregular verbs in the imperfect. So let's take some examples of reflexive verbs and we'll put them into the imperfect. So if I want to say every day I woke up at 9, okay, I would say ogni giorno mi svegliavo alle 9. Ogni giorno mi svegliavo alle 9. So that ogni giorno makes it repetitive. That's why we know we're using the imperfect. So that's why we put the verb into the imperfect tense there, okay? Or we could take the verb sentirsi. Sentirsi means to feel a certain way. If it's reflexive, okay, I could say, yesterday she didn't feel well. And so when you're describing people and their states of being, you in the past, you're going to use the imperfect. So we would say, ieri non si sentiva bene. Ieri non si sentiva bene. Okay? Or if we want to use the verb divertirsi, divertirsi, I already said was to enjoy oneself. So if you want to say they always had fun when they were young, si divertivano sempre quando erano giovani. Si divertivano sempre quando erano giovani. So they always, that always too, it clues you in that you're using the imperfects. They always enjoyed themselves when they were young. Va bene? So facile, see? So now the passato prossimo. That's probably the trickiest out of all of these, just because now there's 3 components when you're forming this tense. You need, first of all, to start with the reflexive pronoun. Then you're going to add the conjugation of essere, and then you're going to add the past participle of the verb. So reflexive verbs in the passato prossimo are always conjugated with essere. You're always going to use essere as the auxiliary verb, okay? So then that means, remember, you know now how to formulate the passato prossimo. When you use essere, the end of the past participle has to agree with gender and number with the subject, right? So when you're using reflexives, that's just another step that you have to think about, okay? Per esempio, if we want to say, I stopped by the coffee shop, okay? Then the verb is fermarsi. Fermarsi means to stop oneself, okay? And if I said that I was stopping myself and I'm a woman, I would say mi sono fermata al caffè. Mi sono fermata al bar, okay? So that's the mi, the reflexive pronoun, sono, the conjugation of essere, and then fermata is the past participle, and the end agrees with me as a woman. Mi sono fermata. So those are a lot of elements to remember in the passato prossimo. So let's take one of the reflexive verbs and let's go through each of the conjugations just so you see it all written out and it solidifies a little bit more. So let's look at the verb annoiarsi. Annoiarsi is the verb to get bored, okay? So to be bored. So I want to use this verb because it looks pretty tricky when it's written out with the irc, okay? But don't be intimidated by it because it's just a regular verb and it's just conjugated a normal way, okay? So the past participle then is going to be 4 choices, right? Because it's either going to be masculine singular, annoiato, feminine singular, annoiata, masculine plural, annoiati, or feminine plural, annoiate, okay? So for each of the conjugations, let's go through the possibilities of what it could be. So if you want to say, I was bored, okay, then in the passato prossimo, you have 2 choices. It's going to be singular, but it could be for a man, it could be for a woman. So a woman would say, mi sono annoiata. I was bored. But a man would say, mi sono annoiato. For the to conjugation, it's the same thing. You have two choices, whether it's a woman you're talking about or a man. Ti sei annoiata for a woman, or ti sei annoiato for a man. For the lui, lei conjugation, it's the same thing. You would say si è annoiata for a woman, si è annoiato for a man. Those are the singular conjugations. Now with the plural, you have two choices, whether you're referring to a group of all guys or a mix of girls and guys or a group of all women. So for the noi form, you would say ci siamo annoiate if it's a group of women saying we were bored. If it's a group of men or mix of girls and guys, you would say ci siamo annoiati. For the voi form, vi siete annoiate, you all were bored, if it's a group of women, or vi siete annoiati, you all were bored for a group, the masculine plural. And then the last one, si sono annoiate for a group of women that were bored, and then si sono annoiati for a group of men that were bored. Va bene? Ok, so facile. Facciamo un altro verbo per coniugarlo, ok? Il verbo mettersi. Mettersi means either to put on, like an article of clothing, or it can mean to begin to do something, okay? It can mean either of those two things. If it's to begin to do something, I began to, then you conjugate the verb reflexively, and then you follow it with an a, and then an infinitive verb. So let's go through the conjugations, and then I'll give you some examples. And mettere has an irregular past participle, so it's messo. That's the past participle. So if I want to say I put on or I began, as a woman, it would be mi sono messa. For a man, mi sono messo. The two choices for the to conjugation, ti sei messa or ti sei messo. For the lui, lei conjugation, si è messa or si è messo. And for the plural conjugations, for the noi, ci siamo messe or ci siamo messi. For the voi, vi siete messe or vi siete messi. And finally, for the loro conjugation, si sono messe or si sono messi. Okay? So now I'll give you some sample sentences where you can see the difference between the meaning of that verb. If I say, mi sono messa un cappello, that's I put on a hat. Mi sono messa un cappello, okay? But if I want to say, I started to study, I would say, mi sono messa a studiare. Mi sono messa a studiare. Va bene? So those two differences there. So now you know how to form reflexives in the present tense, in the imperfect tense, and in the passato prossimo. So the last one is the tra passato prossimo. And remember, that means that's the past perfect, and it means had done whatever. Okay, so let's take the verb arrabbiarsi. Arrabbiarsi is to get mad. So all you do is, again, you have three components. You start with the reflexive pronoun, and then you have the conjugation of essere, but now the essere conjugation is in the imperfect, right? Because that's how you form the tra passato prossimo. And then you follow that with the past participle of the verb. So if I want to say I had gotten angry, I would say mi ero arrabbiata. Or the other choice for a man, mi ero arrabbiato. For the to form, it would either be ti eri arrabbiata or ti eri arrabbiato. For the lui, lei form, si era arrabbiata or si era arrabbiato. For the noi form, ci eravamo arrabbiate or ci eravamo arrabbiati. For the voi form, vi eravate arrabbiate or vi eravate arrabbiati. And finally, for the loro conjugation, si erano arrabbiate or si erano arrabbiati, okay? So like I've said before, you don't use the tra passato prossimo a ton, but you know now how to form it when you use a reflexive verb, okay? And you'll see that there's quite a few verbs that you are going to use reflexively. Verbs that have to do with your daily routine, to wake up, to get up, to shave, to comb your hair, to get ready, to get dressed, okay? So all of those are reflexive. And then remember, if you're talking about reciprocal, things that are happening between groups of people, then you can take some verbs that are non-reflexive and you can make them reciprocal by putting them in the noi, voi, and loro conjugation. Va bene? Ok, ci vediamo presto. Ciao!